to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill. He signed your bill, now you're a law. Oh, yes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 5th Hot Topic webinar of this year. My name is Deborah Sanderson. I'm on the board of directors at Casita Coalition and been advocating for ADUs since 1987, way back then. It's when I first saw the positive benefits they had on my neighborhood and when my mother-in-law moved into our ADU. So it's been a long, good time working on this. Casita has done several hot topic webinars. We've done one on garage conversions, multifamily ADUs, unpermitted ADUs, and options for seniors. Those previous webinars were recorded and available on our website. However, none of this would have been possible without the support of our sponsors and our promotional partners. Many thanks to our major sponsors for the webinar series, Meta and Wells Fargo, plus a lot of additional sponsors who you see on the slide here. And then special thanks to promotional partners for the webinar. These are the folks who help us get the word out about the webinar so that as many people who are interested can attend. So before we start, we have a few short announcements. First, we have some tools we've created that might interest you. For members who've completed an ADU, you can upload your project description to an ADU gallery, which is on our website and available to homeowners to browse through. Also for members, we have an ADU interpretation index, which includes the different interpretations that have been made by HCD over the last couple of years in their handbook. So you can browse through that and find questions and answers on the topics that are most pertinent to you. Third, we have our guidebooks. We have one on garage conversions, multifamily ADUs, ADU finance, ADU best practices. So these are on our website and available to you to download. So without further delay, I'm very pleased to announce today's introductory speaker, Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel. He represents California's 45th Assembly District in the San Fernando Valley, which is part of the area of LA. He's focused on housing and homelessness, education, climate change, and other issues affecting vulnerable communities. He also serves as the chair of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus. We are very pleased to have you with us today. So welcome, Assemblymember Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Deb, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Tom, for the invitation to be here. It's really an honor. And thank you to all of the activists who are here for all of the important work that you do. And it's great to see some of the superstars from the Capitol like Louis Mirante and Matt and other folks who are doing really good work to help push California in the right direction on housing policy. As Deborah mentioned, my name is Jesse Gabriel. I represent the 45th Assembly District in Southern California in the San Fernando Valley. But I was born in Berkeley and I went to Cal undergrad, and my mom grew up in the East Bay. So a little piece of my heart is up there where you guys are founded. Just wanted to be with you today, really, to say thank you, and then also to maybe offer a few thoughts about the politics around housing in Sacramento and the moment and the situation in which we find ourselves. And as Deborah mentioned, I serve on the housing committee, and I serve on the housing committee because one of the first things I did when I was elected a few years ago is ask the speaker to be appointed to that committee. And I wanted to be appointed to that committee because I feel like housing and homelessness are really the two, maybe along with climate change, the two great crises facing our state. And it's been so interesting to me as I've learned about so many other issues in Sacramento and thought about so many other issues and debated so many other issues, how many of the challenges that we face in California, if you trace them back, you can trace them back to our housing crisis. And I will give you an example of that. In my community in the San Fernando Valley, because housing is so expensive, because the supply of housing is not kept up with demand, folks are moving further and further out. They're moving out to Santa Clarita and even further out, and they're commuting 2 hours each way. to and from their jobs in Los Angeles. And obviously that has huge implications for our climate crisis when people are spending 4 hours a day on the freeways. It has huge implications for the amount of time that they can spend with their families, for their mental health, for their wellness, for the strength of their communities, for people's ability to do things like coach their kids' sports team or volunteer in their community. So I've always been very committed to growing our supply of housing in the state of California. I think we fundamentally, at the root of the issue, we have a supply-demand imbalance. We just do not have enough housing in the state of California. And we particularly do not have enough housing that is affordable for working families and for low-income folks. And those are incredibly important challenges that we have to face. And so we are looking for innovative approaches. I'm one of those people who believes that we need an all-of-the-above approach to addressing this issue. And I think the work that you do around ADUs and other creative approaches to this is so important. And actually, unfortunately, some of the only progress we've made in recent years on this has been around ADUs. And I'm, just recalling a conversation I had with folks in the city of Los Angeles in the planning department recently, and they said almost all of the progress that we have been able to make around this issue can be attributed to our ADU laws. And so thank you to all of you for pushing for all of that. Thank you for the work that you've done. You are making a difference. But I think, as we all know, that's not enough. And we need to do a lot more. And so what I thought I would offer to you is maybe just a little bit of a sense of why it's so challenging to make progress on this issue in Sacramento. And as Louis will tell you, one of the challenges with housing is that it touches on a few really complicated and controversial issues, and it brings in a lot of stakeholders that have a lot of power. And so obviously we have conversations around with the labor movement, and I'm somebody who comes to a family of 4 generations of active involvement in the labor movement, but there have been challenges getting labor and housing developers on the same size. We have conversations with environmentalists, and I'm someone who has a 100% lifetime score with the Sierra Club, but I also consider myself very pro-housing and think that housing is part of the answer to our climate crisis. We have complicated conversations around local control. A lot of my counterparts in city government down here don't necessarily want the state to make decisions for them, but at a moment when we are not making progress and have not made progress for so long, I think there's a much more justifiable case for the state to get involved. And then frankly, we have people, including a lot of people in my neighborhood, who are not shy about sharing their opinions with me, who just don't want more housing built, who are terrified that it's going to somehow impact their quality of life or reduce their housing values. And so all of that combination of issues makes it a very, very difficult one to both find the right policy solution and then also navigate the politics. And part of the challenge, just to be totally honest, is that we don't have consensus, particularly in Southern California, particularly in the LA delegation that I represent, around the best path forward. And it's what I would share with people. There was a poll done about 1.5 years ago by Loyola Marymount University down here in Southern California. And they asked people in LA County, do you consider yourself a YIMBY or a NIMBY? And the results were 51-49 on that poll. And so in a lot of ways, some of the issues that are complicated in national politics, reproductive freedom, marriage equality, other things that people talk about, they're not really complicated in Southern California because we're so democratic in LA County, but really housing is the wedge issue. Housing is the complicated issue. And it's really interesting to see how those conversations evolve. But I'm someone who believes that we have this incredible homelessness crisis. It is a moral and humanitarian crisis in addition to an economic one. We have an affordable housing crisis. I see it manifest itself in so many ways, including people of my age who grew up in my community that can no longer afford to live in the communities where they grew up. People who are being priced out of the communities where they want to live and where their families have lived for a long time. And I know that the answer to all of this, as complicated as these issues may be, there's also a really simple answer, which is build more housing, create more units, create more supply. And I know that all of you who are here understand that. So I just wanted to share with you, to the extent that it's helpful, a little bit of a 30,000-foot view on housing in Sacramento right now. Continues to remain complicated, but we have some big bills this year that may help us to push through some of that logjam. And I've been proud to support those bills, even though they've been politically complicated on certain levels. But just wanted to say thank you to all of you. The work that you have done has made a difference, is continuing to make a difference. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to work together because we have a lot of work to do. And the progress that we make on housing is going to make a difference for so many people across the state of California and on so many issues, not just on the issue of housing affordability. So thank you all. I hope you have a really productive conversation and hope to see you in the Capitol sometime soon. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for that. We should thank you. If we don't have people like you in the legislature, we wouldn't be where we are either. It's really, it takes a village, as they say, to make progress on this issue. It's very deeply embedded in the way local governments think. So we appreciate your positions and for supporting us in the legislature. So
thank you.
And
yes, as they say, Deborah, politics is a team sport.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
We appreciate
several teams. Okay, thank you very much, and we wish you well, and thank you for all your support there. Okay, so now we're going to go to today's webinar on current legislation. Our moderator will be Jared. Basler. Sorry, I know Jared. I don't know why I blocked his name. We'll have a presentation. Then he's going to open it up for questions. And you can submit questions for the presenters and the panelists using the Q&A button. Please, oh please, do not use the chat button. The Q&A button, that's what is there, questions and answers. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Jared Basler, who's a new member of our staff. He's our Director of Strategic Initiatives. And we are so glad to have him. And Jared, over to you.
All right, thank you, Deborah. Today we have a couple of great presenters for us. We've got Louis Mirante and Matt Regan. Louis Mirante is a Casita Coalition board member and the legislative director for California YIMBY, where he's been advocating for improvements to small housing law in the California legislature since 2017. Matt Regan, Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Bay Area Council, is also on the board of the Casita Coalition. Matt oversees key policy objectives, including housing and land use. He currently serves as a Contra Costa First Five Commissioner and an advisory board member for Catalyst Housing. So I'll send it over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Jared. And I'll do a quick slideshow, just maybe expand a little bit on that introduction. The Bay Area Council represents about 300 of the largest employers in the 9-county Bay Area. And we survey our members every year, ask them what their principal areas of concern are about the health of the region's economy, the stability of our region from an equity and climate perspective and all other perspectives. And housing is always number one. And it's been a legacy challenge for our region for a long time. And so they task us, our member companies task the Bay Area Council with finding solutions to the housing crisis. And for many years, we focused on, and still do to a large degree, focus on removing the impediments to building traditional types of housing stock and multifamily infill apartments and condominiums, that sort of stuff. And that's really important. But we've been failing at that for so long that under the chairmanship of Denise Pinkston, who chaired our housing committee for several years, we started to look at new ideas. So, is there another way? Is there a way to get past some of these impediments, a different type of housing we can get behind? And obviously accessory dwelling units have been so successful in other peer economies, particularly Vancouver, British Columbia, that we thought, let's try that. And that was really what kickstarted our efforts on SB 1069 back in 2016, which is really one of the reasons why we're all here today. But as an organization, people ask, why is big business, why are big employers so focused and concerned about accessory dwelling units? And I'll do a quick slideshow and maybe shed some light on our rationale and reasoning for doing this work. As Assemblymember Gabriel just explained, this is primarily a supply and demand mismatch. And this is my favorite slide in the whole world. The little red area on the far left of your map, that's the 9-county Bay Area. That's the footprint of the Bay Area Council membership. The dark blue states are states with smaller economies than the 9-county Bay Area. This is the most economically productive place probably in human history. We have been growing companies from whole cloth for decades. We're the world epicenter of venture capital investment, the world epicenter for tech, biotech, you name it. Companies that need to be at the cutting edge of anything are here. And they're growing and they're employing people and they're bringing talent from all over the world to come and live and work here. And that's a good thing. The bad thing is we've not been building any housing for them. This is a chart that shows California's housing production numbers dating back to 1955. And as you can see, the housing industry is very cyclical at peaks and troughs. And it's had regular peaks and troughs all the way up through the early 1990s. Something happened back then, lots of things happened, but the implications were that we stopped essentially building housing in the early 90s, and it has never fully recovered. People will tell you that, you know, we've been through a housing boom because I saw a condominium development in my community, therefore we must have been building like crazy. Well, wrong. As you can see from the early to mid 2000s to the current time, we're at historic recessionary levels of housing production. We need, as the state keeps telling us, to build 180 to 200,000 units a year to maintain affordability. We're at less than half that. And it's again, the rationale and the reasons for that are, you know, we're going to have to do 4 more webinars to explain that. But the raw numbers are the raw numbers. This is why we have a housing affordability crisis in California. Gross underproduction of units. What are the implications of that? Well, here you're looking at 17 of the top 20 rental markets. Most expensive rental markets in the nation are here in the Bay Area. Again, a product of a growing economy and an anemic housing production market. And that has societal implications. It has equity implications. And as you can see, the lower you are down the income scale, the more of your income you end up spending on housing and the more housing burdened you become. You end up not having money to save for your kids' college, not having money to save for your retirement, not having money for, you know, the basic things in life if you're giving 2/3 of your annual or monthly income to a landlord. So it has huge implications societally. And then this is a chart that really worries us. Every state has population churn. And in California, that we're probably, as a very dynamic state, a growing state, we have probably more churn than anywhere else. And as you can see, over the years, we've been churning in a way that is not particularly equitable. We've been losing low-income people. Families that traditionally make less than $50,000 a year have been leaving California. We have done, up until relatively recently, we have been bringing in more upper income people to work in our growing tech, biotech, et cetera, economies. That has even started to taper off. That's why we've suddenly started to lose population in California in the last couple of years, and we actually lost a congressional seat because of it. That's primarily because people have stopped moving here. It has become so prohibitively expensive. But for the last number of decades, as you can see, we have essentially been exiling lower income Californians to other states. And as Assemblymember Gabriel mentioned, there are equity implications of that. And I don't know what anybody's individual politics are, but California is supposedly a progressive state. We've had a decade of progressive leadership, and I would argue some very regressive outcomes. 40,000 Californians a year leave California for one state, to Texas. And that's a state that has little or no regard for voting rights for minorities, little or no regard for marriage rights for LGBTQ communities, and now little or no regard for reproductive rights for women. But we as a progressive state think it's okay to exile 40,000 of our fellow Californians to Texas every year, because if we build housing for them here, that would be a bad thing because a developer might make some money. So for whatever your perspective are, political, environmental, economic, building more housing is an imperative. And that's why we got into the accessory dwelling unit business, if you will, because we discovered that this was a way to build significant numbers of new housing units, bypass a lot of the political challenges that exist for existing traditional housing stock. And when we first started, there was a certain amount of scorn and derision that accessory dwelling units would actually make a real impact. It's a marginal thing. It'll be good for a few people in a few markets, but it won't really make an impact. Well, fast forward, only 5 years since we passed that first bill. And it's now the only good news story we have to tell in California as it relates to housing production. Cole Peterson, who wrote Backyard Revolution, estimates that by 2026, 1 in 10 homes in LA will have an accessory dwelling unit. We went from essentially from 200 permits a year issued in the state of California to close to 20,000 a year. I mean, it's a phenomenal story to tell, a phenomenal good news story to tell. We have more to do in the legislative front, and Lewis and I are going to talk about that. There are more loopholes to fill, cracks to fill in terms of sand in the gears that cities, uncooperative cities are still trying to do. But we do have a good news story to tell here. We are producing significant numbers of new housing units at a price point that is traditionally affordable to working families and working people. So this is certainly something that we need to continue doing. We have some good legislation this year. And since 2016, when we did 1069, there have been several additional bills that have made it easier and more economically feasible for homeowners to build accessory dwelling units. We still have the big financing challenge to address, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But that's why we're doing it. And that's why I think we're making progress, and it's a good news story to tell. We need to tell it to more people. So thanks for joining us today to listen. We're all on the side of angels here, and I think certainly in less than a decade we'll be able to put our hands on our hearts and say that we made a tangible difference in the lives of a lot of people by supporting accessory dwelling units and building them. Thanks, Lewis.
Thank you, Matt. Let me put my slides up here real quick. All right. Does that come up for folks? All right. Well, thank you, Matt, for that wonderful overview of where California is and the impacts that ADUs are having on California. My name is Louis Mirante. I'm the legislative director for California YIMBY. I'm also on the board of the Casita Coalition. And today I'm going to help walk through some of the updates on ADU legislation, small home legislation in California. Matt and I are going to ping pong a little bit here on this, but I'm excited today to bring you kind of the insider's perspective on what's going on with ADU politics. So first, just a broad overview of what ADUs mean to legislators. I think as you heard today, there's a pretty broad consensus among legislators that ADUs are one of the shining successes of legislation, of the housing, interventions that local governments and governments generally have been trying to make. And I think that they think it's a great way to build affordable housing, to stabilize home ownership, and to make progress on what has heretofore been an otherwise intractable problem. That's a really, I think, meaningful advantage benefit that we as ADU experts and practitioners and activists benefit from. Something that I'll get to this later, we need to protect. Because the other ongoing dynamic is that NIMBY legislators are getting much more organized. As ADU companies and housing laws generally get more ambitious and more productive, NIMBY legislators are finding more and more ways to fight back. And that's something that our movement, our companies, our state is going to have to respond to. I think Assemblymember Gabriel put this delicately when he said that there's a lack of consensus on housing, on state housing interventions, on things like ADU law in general within the LA caucus, and in particular within the Democrats in the LA caucus. When you look at the actual votes, for example, you might think, oh, well, this is a productive policy. It's going to create jobs. It's going to create affordable housing. Of course, the Democrats are all supporting ADU policies. Of course, the Democrats are all, making it easier to build housing. Not so. When you look at the votes for ADU laws, for really any housing laws, there is a very, very, very powerful contingent of LA Democrats who are consistently voting no on this. something that our movement, our companies need to be thoughtful about and respond to strategically in future years. Maybe we'll just start with a little bit of an overview of the legislative process. The legislative process is complex. We're not going to get too much into it today. But one of the things that the Casita Coalition is very proud of, and I'm proud of, Matt's proud of, is that we work closely with ADU practitioners to make sure that we're advocating for best practices in the legislature, that we're correcting problems where our partners see them out in the field trying to build stuff. Deb Sanderson has been just doing the yeoman's work on this for decades, in particular, along with folks like Denise Pinkston. But that network of the capital experts, the ADU experts, the planners, the practitioners, that network is so important to making sure that we as advocates are getting our policy right. And that first step, honestly, begins with you. So we have a couple of emails down there on the bottom of the slide for ways to get engaged. I would definitely recommend you reach out to Celeste and Jared. But the starting point for any ADU bill in the past has really been a practitioner who's seen an opportunity to improve something or to make something more powerful. So please get involved. It really is a very high value thing for us, and I think for ADU experts across the state. We then take ideas, we find a legislator to carry our proposal. Folks like Assemblymember Gabriel are really fired up about this issue because they see it as solving their constituents' problems. And so when we're able to bring quality ideas to them, they really see a lot of value in that relationship with us with that relationship with you as well. We then sort of take the policy, we explain it to policy committees, who are the first step for legislation. And then after the policy committees have reviewed whatever the bill is that we're working on, it'll go to the floor of the House. So the Assembly or the Senate will take a full floor vote and then pass it off to the next House, where that process will begin again. Ultimately, we, knock on wood, hope to find ourselves with a bill on the governor's desk. And this governor in particular has really opened his door, has been really clear with me and with others that he is going to sign the strongest version of housing bills that get to his desk. And, that's an open window for us that will not always be there. Like I've said, there's a very, very powerful contingent of folks out there, many of them in very high elected positions within the Democratic Party, who are not pro-housing, who are opponents to ADU law. We'll get to some of that in the future, in a future slide, but that we need to take seriously as a threat. So let's just review some of the past victories. Matt talked about, I think, what was the biggest initial victory on ADU law, which was SB 1069. Matt, can I ping pong to you a little bit to just go over what 1069 was and kind of what the bill did? Uh-oh, Matt seems frozen. There he is. Matt, do you want to just give us a little summary of what 1069 was?
Sorry, yeah, I'm having unstable internet messages pop.
Okay. Well, Matt, maybe I'll just jump in and just keep it rolling while you figure that out. SB 1069 really kicked off, I think, at a meta level, what is an ongoing conversation between the state government and local governments around the state about the relationship between the state and local governments. For the first time, a bill said, no, this isn't a recommendation anymore. You local governments have to play ball. You have to figure this out somehow in terms of getting ADUs out there. We as the legislature find this to be a compelling state priority, and we're not going to just let you say no anymore. AB 68 was, I think, the next step in that development. This was a bill by Assemblymember Ting in 2019 that created subdivision E of the government of the government code for ADUs, which I regard as the most powerful individual line of state law with regard to housing. It says it creates the 800 square foot ministerial approval process for ADUs that meet the criteria of that code section, really backing up what 1069 had to say about the state's role in making sure that ADUs are proliferating. Oh, didn't mean to do that. And then AB 881, which is actually something we'll hear a little bit more about from Matt, hopefully later today, with regard to our homeownership requirements. There had been owner-occupant requirements in many cities on ADUs that experts like Cole Peterson had found to be the biggest barrier to the proliferation of ADUs in California and across the country. And AB 881 repealed those owner occupancy requirements, something that we are trying to preserve actually in legislation this year, again, that Matt will talk about in a little bit. We've also had some really critical victories in the past. We've stopped, for example, SB 1292 from, again, powerful Democrat Henry Stern of LA that would have made ADUs illegal in most of the state. That was a really big victory, I think. It would have shifted the conversation back to local governments, would have put power back in local governments to deny ADU applications. We also helped stop ACA 7. And when I mean we, I'm talking about a broad community of advocates in Sacramento that the Casita Coalition is certainly a part of and helping move forward. I think the Casita Coalition in particular responded very forthrightly to SB 1292, and our members expressed strong opposition to that bill and explained to legislators that this would have an extremely deleterious impact on the ADU industry here in California, which is now a $4 or $5 billion industry, as Matt said, producing about 20,000 typically affordable homes each year. That is such a huge accomplishment that we should not be turning off. And legislators responded by killing that bill, something that, you know, we as an advocacy community and as an industry need to protect. That's a relationship with the legislature we need to cultivate, protect. Similarly, again, ACA 7, which would have amended California's constitution, comes from another powerful LA Democrat, Assemblymember Mirante, would have completely shifted control back to local governments, would have made ADUs a recommendation again, rather than a requirement, which would have just been a huge disaster. And again, that bill stopped in large part because of ADU experts' advocacy, including the work of Casita Coalition members. I think there's a lot to be said about implementation of ADU law in SB 9 this year that we can hold up as really great victories. But I want to focus actually on the Housing Accountability Unit at the Department of Housing and Community Development that there's an email for right there, compliance review at HCD, that if you don't know about, I really hope you do. In 2021, California YIMBY, the organization that I work for, was, I think, the spearhead on an effort to create what has become known as the Housing Accountability Unit. It is an opportunity for folks like yourselves who build ADUs to go to the state HCD, to the state housing department, and ask questions of the state about how to respond to a local government's request of a project. HCD has now the authority to sue local governments who are violating ADU law. And so this is a great opportunity for you to get some free help, to get some free muscle from the state, to get your projects through, let's just say, mistaken roadblocks or something, that the local governments are throwing in your way. So I would really recommend folks get in touch with HCD through the compliance review email address if you have not already. Maybe just establish a relationship, but that is such a valuable benefit. They have about $4 million in budget and about 30 employees who are working on this. And so, I'm very proud to have played a part in creating that, and I really want it to be useful to folks like yourselves. This is kind of an ongoing assessment of our threats. SB 1404 would require full CEQA documentation and would take ADUs out of the current ministerial approval process, putting them back in the discretionary process. Every time a project proponent removes more than three or more oak trees. I'm also happy to report this bill actually just died, so I can take it off the current threat list. But just again, another bill from a Democrat that's trying to undermine the production of ADUs, trying to undermine the production of housing. And again, emphasizing that point that our industry needs a bigger presence in the Capitol, needs to have a presence that is cultivating, creating relationships with the legislature to preserve the power of state ADU law and preserve the power of state housing law, heck, to expand the power of state housing law to accelerate the benefits that housing law has had to our industry. So great, so I get to take a little break here. This is our ongoing legislative and sort of otherwise efforts slide. where I want to talk about the big name legislation affecting ADUs this year. And I'll kick it to Matt, who's been the lead on SB 897, probably the biggest ADU bill of the year, to explain what he's doing over there with Senator Wojciechowski.
Thanks, Lewis, and apologies for the earlier internet connectivity issues. Well, thank you for that great overview. A lot going on, but a lot remains to be done. As we know, when we do something productive and positive, the enemies of our work get better organized, and they continue to throw impediments and roadblocks in our way. And this is no different for accessory dwelling units than any other legislative movement. So we've been chipping away, and Lewis sort of ran through the bills that have addressed some of the remaining impediments after SB 1069, and we're looking at some today with SB 897. It codifies certain things that have been challenges for ADU developers, like make sure that that an accessory dwelling unit does not have to do. It codifies that it's not a multifamily dwelling, and you don't have to do sprinklers, for example. An important codification, because we've heard reports from practitioners that some cities are still requiring, even though the law is clear that you do not have to do sprinklers. Some cities are still throwing that in front of you as an impediment, and we know that can cost many thousands of dollars, particularly if you have to build sprinklers in the existing single family home as well. So things like that. But one of the biggest things we've been working on, there are two major new developments in 897, is removing this 2025 sunset for owner occupancy requirements. Cities that require that an ADU can only be built if the owner of the single family residence remains in residence in that single family home, and it's not there are not two renting families on that lot. That impediment is a serious roadblock to ADU construction. It gives potential ADU builders, homeowners, really cold feet. If they are tied to the property in perpetuity, then the chances of them deciding to build an ADU diminish quite considerably. So we would like that 2025 sunset prohibiting owner occupancy requirements to be removed and make it an in perpetuity thing. Obviously, that's presenting some challenges. We're currently in the suspense file of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. And the chair of that committee has not traditionally, he's one of those LA Democrats who's not traditionally been a big supporter of housing or accessory dwelling units, for that matter, Anthony Portantino. He's asking us to remove the provision that would end the sunset for owner occupancy. And our author, Senator Wojciechowski, is adamant that that is a cornerstone of the bill. So we're at a bit of an impasse. So if you're a constituent of Senator Portantino's, please reach out to him. Please tell him that this is important. So that's something that's holding our bill up currently, and but we are working on potential solutions to that. The bill also would increase potentially, under certain circumstances, ADU height limits to 25 feet, trying to address the problem of building over garages. Obviously, we don't want to create scenarios where people are building to 25 feet right on the fence line. That's not something we're seeking to, create fights with neighbors. But if we're adjacent to or within the zoned envelope for the existing residents, then that's something we'd really like to see. That would definitely increase the number of ADUs, the possibilities for ADUs across the state. And then on the financing piece, I don't know, Lewis, do we want to jump into the financing piece right now? Or yeah. So one of the remaining major impediments to building accessory dwelling units is finding available financing options for homeowners, particularly low-income homeowners. Traditionally, as we've seen the growth of the ADU industry, the people who are building them, and we've seen heat maps of where they're being built, are people with access to the capital to build them, or people with access to leverage their equity in their existing homes. They can do a cash out refinance, they can do a home equity line of credit, or they can use savings. So what we're seeing is that that ADUs are more often than not being built in wealthier, whiter communities and not so much in lower income communities of color. And it has always been our position at the Bay Area Council and at the Casita Coalition that this should be an opportunity that's open and available to all homeowners. So how do we close that gap? How do we create opportunities for lower income homeowners who may not have sufficient equity, loan to income ratios to qualify for a standard bank loan to build an accessory dwelling unit? And the problem is essentially a federal problem. The banks are handcuffed in that they cannot make loans to prospective ADU builders predicated upon predicted future rental income from that ADU. So if you don't have the cash on hand or the ability to leverage your existing real estate, then it's really difficult to build a $150,000 ADU. So how do we create loan products for banks? How do we create opportunities for banks and other lenders to make those loans to lower income homeowners? And allow them to participate and partake in this great opportunity. And again, we would argue that lower income homeowners have far more to upside benefits, and there are far more upside societal benefits when low income homeowners build these than wealthier homeowners. Not that that unit of housing is not important, but certainly there are multiplier effects when lower income homeowners are able to build these as well. It stabilizes their housing situation. It creates a revenue generating asset in the backyard. If we're building additional rental units in lower income communities, that's always a good thing. So we're looking at options on how to, certainly at the federal level, we had some really good news last week from President Biden's White House, where they made an announcement on accessory dwelling unit financing. They are actively at the pressing of the Casita Coalition. We have had multiple conversations with federal officials on this issue. How do we create an opportunity for banks to get into the ADU lending business to lower income homeowners? And so the federal government is looking at potentially changing the rules or finding ways for banks to do this. At the state level, there have been a number of initiatives. HCD has a loan fund, which is, I don't know, I haven't seen any data recently, but we're looking at, we haven't seen, I don't think, an awful lot of units produced from that loan fund. Within SB 897, there is a financing mechanism placeholder language provision, and there's $50 million in this current budget for accessory dwelling units. So we would hope that we would be able to create some kind of financing mechanism with that $50 million to expand opportunities to lower income homeowners. It's a really tough nut to crack. A number of institutions have tried, and there hasn't been anything scalable yet that I have seen, certainly, that cracks the nut, but it's something we desperately need to do, and it could really open the doors to a lot of ADU opportunities to a lot of lower income homeowners and make this a much more equitable venture, and I think that's in the best interest of all of us.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. I think then before kind of moving to our kind of final wrap-up slide, I want to just highlight AB 2221 as a bill that's going on this year. Among other things, this bill would loop in non-planning departments to the definitions of like permit agencies so that those departments are caught up in the same timelines and requirements of state ADU law. Again, just kind of moving the ball forward slightly on ADU laws efficacy. I more actually want to highlight, though, that this bill is an example of a great work product of the Casita Coalition and our members coming together. Many of the problems that are identified in AB 2221 and solved by that bill came to us from one of Casita Coalition's member companies, Abodu. Came from their practice in building homes across mostly the Bay Area, and was just a great synthesis, I think, of learning from practitioners, connecting them with me, getting that connected to a legislator. And that's just the power of our network. We can produce change, we can produce positive change. When our members are stepping up and getting involved in advocacy efforts and putting their problems forward, because I think there's still a broad window of legislators who are interested in solving those problems. And the governor himself has expressed very clearly that he's willing to sign the strongest housing bills that get to him. So fingers crossed about 897 and 2221. Like Matt said, if you are a constituent of Senator Portantino's in particular, please do give his office a phone call and express your support for that bill. Okay. So here's just, I think this is our last slide. Here's just a list of resources for our members. You know, as always, one of the best things that you can do is just get involved. Direct engagement with the legislature is something we really like to offer to our members. As Deb had mentioned earlier, the guidelines and the HCD response database are really great resources for you to be able to understand what your rights are as a builder, and then to put those in front of a local government to demonstrate, you know, that you're right about something and hopefully clear a roadblock. If you are not already connected to Jared and attending our monthly member calls, I would definitely encourage you to join there as well. We're thinking about doing deeper dives into legislation and legislative efforts on those as well. So I'm eager to, I'm a little bit late here, but I'm eager to get to Q&A with our colleague Jared at the Casita Coalition. And so if you haven't already dropped a question in the Q&A box, I encourage you to go there. Thanks again for attending this conversation and for your work on ADUs. If you're not already a Casita Coalition, I want to give you a hard pitch for joining. We are definitely at the forefront of making sure that ADU law is successful here in California, and as Matt has said, across the nation. So thanks everybody for your interest and your attendance here today.
And if I could also add, Louis, just to echo what you said earlier, if anybody on this call, on this webinar, has an idea for next year's accessory dwelling unit legislation, please share. We are here as an asset for you. And you know what Louis and I do is we go to the Capitol and hopefully solve problems. So we work for you guys.
All right. Well, thank you to both Louis and Matt for presentations. We are a little bit late getting into the Q&A. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of kind of general questions. And Debbie has a couple of closing remarks, and we'll add another, 10 minutes or so for if people want to stick around for additional Q&A to get more into the weeds. But one of the things you said, and I think Debbie's going to join us as well for the Q&A, but one of the things that you had said in the last kind of portion, Matt, was ideas for future legislation, getting back to a little bit to the kind of like the timeline process of as Louis was talking about the how get something together, we take it to a legislator that's helpful to get it into the legislature, and then it runs through committees. What's the best time to get involved, or what's the kind of like cutoff for when it's really things are able to be changed, or what's the best time to be able to be impactful there?
Well, I'll sort of do a macro level, and Louis, you can get into more of the details. But generally the fall is when organizations like ours get together and start noodling on ideas for the next year's session and what legislation we're going to run. Our members get together and we kick ideas around and hopefully come up with some legislative vehicles that we then go bring to authors. So the fall is generally when that work is done. But that's not to say that, as the sausage is being made in Sacramento, you can't bring friendly amendments to any bill at any time. There's a rule in Sacramento that there are no rules. It's everything can be bent or broken, so don't feel that if you're late to the game, if you're looking at a piece of legislation that you think you have a constructive comment on, a potential idea that could make it better. Share it with us. We can see if we can insert it into as a friendly amendment into either of our current ADU bills.
And does that slow down the process at all, or how does it impact the timing?
It does a little bit depending on where the bill is in the process. So if you make a substantive policy change to a bill that's, say, moved from the Assembly over to the Senate, then it has to go back to the Assembly to be approved by that respective policy committee. So it does slow it up a little bit, but it's not something that's an insurpassable problem. It happens all the time.
I think just to underscore Matt's point about there not being any rules, one thing that I really want to impress upon folks today is legislators want to solve your problems. When you're bringing them ideas about how to improve ADU law, you're actually bringing something to them that is valuable to them. And so if they think, oh, wow, this is a really great idea, they can make that happen, and they can make that law within 72 hours if the willingness is there. So don't feel like, oh, this is too difficult, this is too challenging. Let folks like me and Matt and Deb and everybody else on this call run the politics on how to get that thing done, but make sure you're speaking up with those problems.
I think the other thing I'd like to add is for folks to remember that it's a long process. So you can bring up an issue, maybe you can't get it in this year, but then we're primed with it as something to consider next year. Some of these successes took us several years of effort before they were adopted. So look to the long run, let us know your issues, and if not this year, maybe next year.
And sometimes things move faster than you think. I mean, going back to SB 1069, we were kind of a little bit late in the legislative session coming up with, the whole ADU idea as something to maybe run some bills on and making it easier for homeowners. And the Senate actually held an informational hearing, which they do sometimes just to get a broader understanding from stakeholders on what's wrong with the market. And I testified at a hearing in 2015, and Senator Wachowski was on that Senate panel. And I mentioned accessory dwelling units as a potential idea that we would work on next year. And he said, no, we're doing it this year. We are going to work this year on a bill. And so we had to scramble in a month or two to pull together some legislation. And thankfully he was a little more urgent than we were, because the history is that that it has been a great success. But that's sometimes just these things come out of the blue, and you just mention an idea and all of a sudden you have a bill.
Yeah, and I also, from a practitioner side, I remember having issues that these are big problems that we're facing in the field. But I think also from a practitioner side, you have to think about how to what's a way that it can be fixed. And then, as it goes further up the chain, trying to figure out how it actually is going to get implemented. So I think a lot of times when we see problems, we forget that they're a microcosm of our specific situations, and there's not sometimes enough broad support there for that change. But it's still very important to bring those up, because we can help solve things on local levels as well. One question I had is that this kind of goes to where both of the bills you guys are working on are at right now. Is obviously this is Wachowski's last term. This is people call it his legacy bill, or it's his last hurrah. With regards to kind of like the political will, do you see that there's more support to try to get that through because it's his last term, or does that play into it at all?
It does to a degree. There's a certain amount of deference given to legislators, as they leave the building, and not that he has declared this to be his legacy legislation, but it's pretty commonly acknowledged that it is. This has been sort of the cornerstone of his legislative agenda for the last number of years, and this bill, I think, is something that he wants to leave on a high note on. So which is kind of a little and which is probably why he's upset with the chair of appropriations right now for messing with his legacy legislation. But we would hope that given his long and distinguished career in the legislature, that this bill is given a certain amount of deference for that reason alone. It does. There are some traditions in the building, and that is one of them. So we're going to play that hand as hard as we can.
All right. Well, we still have a ton of questions. I want to hand it back over to Debbie so she can do some closing remarks and some housekeeping. And then after Debbie's done, we'll go ahead and jump back into Q&A to get more into some of the specific questions around the specific bills. So, Debbie.
Okay. Thank you, Jared. These are great questions. I hope all of you can stay a little bit, and we can have more Q&A. It's really going quite nicely. So I want to thank our special guest today, Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel, of course, Louis and Matt, for helping us do this webinar. Next month, we're scheduled to do one on SB 9, which we get a lot of questions on. So I think that will be a really good webinar. So if you want to stay informed about upcoming events, you can join Casita Coalition, or you can sign up for our mailing list, or you can do both. We are a membership organization. If you like what we're doing, please support our efforts by joining Casita Coalition. When we first formed Casita, I had not really understood fully how important it was to have a coalition that protects what we've already gained. And I think we're seeing now the value of having one statewide group that keeps its eye on all this ADU stuff and make sure that people hear when there's something at risk of losing our ADU progress so far. So thank you very much. And we are so glad you came. If you want to be a sponsor on a subsequent webinar, please contact Executive Director Tom Limon, and he can give you more information on that. So thank you. Hope to see you next month. And now let's bring it back to Jared so he can continue our Q&A.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
So yeah, thanks everyone. We'll stick around for probably another 10, 15 minutes to get through as many questions as we can. One that's popped up for you, Louis, is what's up with the commercial, removing the commercial stuff in AB 2221?
Yeah, so AB 2221 would have said that in areas that have mixed use buildings, you could build an ADU in the commercial space of the mixed use building. It is my strong contention that this is already the law. That is already what current law allows you to do. There is some debate about that, and AB 2221 would have resolved that debate. We just got pushback from local governments on that one, and our author decided to go a different direction. But it's something that I still think is worthy of additional clarification in state law.
And yeah, it's certainly one of those that we've talked about plenty of times, and is it takes the right kind of argument to make that point and have it succeed. Definitely would appreciate that continuing to move forward in future years, because obviously that's something that we see as an issue. Wanted to get into a couple of questions about, hold on a second. On the finance side, Matt, I know that there's money that's being put in for different programs here in the state. You want to touch just a little bit more on what you see in that? Yeah,
so the program that HCD put together created a forgivable loan program for ADU applicants. So if a homeowner wanted to build an ADU, they could apply for a state grant. They were income qualified. You had to meet certain income restrictions. And you could offset, $25,000 of your startup costs, design review, and permitting and all of the soft upfront costs. The state subsequently increased that to, I think, $50,000 of upfront costs. But I think the challenge that they're discovering, and this is something that the Silicon Valley Community Foundation a few years ago tried to do something similar by offsetting upfront costs. $40,000 does. Thanks, David. Is that if a homeowner doesn't qualify for the $150,000 loan that's needed to build the unit, offsetting 40 upfront is really, it's not going to create a much larger market, if you will, for that product. What we really need, what's going to be a scalable solution, is letting banks get into this, finding a way to get banks who are professionals in the business of loaning money to people, finding a way to get them into the ADU space, and particularly for homeowners who, again, don't qualify under traditional lending practices and protocols. So again, can we find a way to allow future rental income to qualify a homeowner for an ADU loan? I think that's the nut that we can crack. And I think that's something that that we're going to push for at the Bay Area Council, and I know Casita Coalition as well. Because and it might be something as simple as taking a chunk of state money and using that as a way to offset the small percentage of loans that go bad. And that's primarily why the federal government is not letting banks get into this particular market niche, is because obviously we had a banking collapse not long ago, and it was a lot of it was because they made too many risky loans. So there's definitely, especially around residential real estate, so there's definitely some real caution there at the federal level. But if we can put up some money as a state and say, hey, you know, the banks will be made whole if 2% of these loans go bad, we will backstop those bad loans, then that allows the banks to get into the business. That takes care of the federal government's reticence on allowing them into this space. That could potentially be the solution to the problem. So, you know, I'm not a financing expert or a banking expert by any stretch, but I think that's really the bullseye solution that we're looking at, is finding a way to get the banks in.
Yeah. One question kind of for all of you is every year, and I think this kind of is something that came up last year, was what's the political will this year for ADU bills? And I actually remember last year, towards, you know, into the fall, it was, oh, there's not going to be, you know, really anything that's coming on. You know, it's going to be a quiet year for ADU bills, and obviously that hasn't been the case. Is there, is it going to keep being hot, or is this going to cool off? So I think we see it just staying at the top of mind for the legislature for the time being, but I'd love to get your opinion on that.
Lewis?
That's a great question, Jared. I think with Senator Wieckowski exiting, there's definitely going to be an absence of leadership. There's going to be a vacuum. And what's the phrase about power abhorring a vacuum or something like that? So you could see somebody try to step up after Senator Wieckowski's retirement soon to just be like, hey, I'm the ADU legislator now. I'm the ADU senator. I'm the ADU assembly member. So you could see that dynamic. I think in my conversations with legislators, I'm led to believe that focusing on SB 9 implementation is going to be a bigger priority next year. We're learning a lot of lessons currently from SB 9 focused companies on what's working, what's not working. And I think there's going to be a lot of interest in focusing on solving a lot of those problems next year. You know, I think though, as ADU law continues to demonstrate success, legislators are going to want to be a part of that success. They want to be associated with laws that work, just like Assemblymember Gabriel said at the top of the presentation. So I'm giving you a strong maybe, Jared.
Yeah,
So have all those ideas ready, is what you're saying.
We're losing a few strong proponents of ADUs, not just Senator Wieckowski. I mean, Senator Hertzberg is leaving the building as well, and he's always been a cheerleader. While not an author of ADU legislation himself, whenever they get to his committee, he stands up and thumps his chest and says, you know, this bill's getting out. You know, and he's always been a big champion. And so it is important that we as an ADU community recognize, and it might be something for the Casita Coalition to do at the end of session, is to recognize those departing members who have been real champions for us, because there are certainly, and as we develop and grow friends and allies for accessory dwelling units, the NIMBY legislators on the other side are doing exactly the same thing. One of the biggest opponents back in 2015-16 of 1069 was Senator Fran Pavley. And Senator Fran Pavley, as you might remember, wrote AB 32, our signature climate change laws. And when I met with her to advocate for the bill, I told her that this would reduce commute patterns. It would allow people who work in her community to live in her community, which is Calabasas and Malibu and a lot of very wealthy gated communities. And her face was just shocked. You mean they would be allowed to live here? And when I talk about generational opponents, it's no coincidence that her chief of staff during that meeting is now Senator Henry Stern. So these, the opponents are as we develop and build relationships, they're doing exactly the same thing. So we cannot let our guard down.
I want to add a point to that, Matt, because I think that's spot on. And in that particular case makes the argument this is political, not about policy. Senator Henry Stern, when he was in law school, wrote a white paper that calls for California to preempt local government on all housing questions so that the state government can move forward on its climate goals. And as state senator, he is not, I'm not saying one of, he is the most obstinate Democrat on housing production legislation. A completely contrary opinion to that expressed when he was in law school. He's made a strategic calculation that his opinion has to be no on housing for his constituents, for his future in politics. And like, no amount of education is going to change his mind on this legislation, which means we as a coalition need to grow our political strength to push back against folks like him and the NIMBY caucuses in the legislature.
Let's not forget that Henry is the son of Marv from Home Alone, so we can start calling him the Casita Bandit.
It is
out there to take away your home. So, all right. I think that there's a lot of kind of talk around the owner occupancy requirements and how Cole's got a great comment in there about utilizing that as precedent for further. Obviously, that's not something that we aren't those legal experts here. Definitely pass that on to our friends over that are legal experts there. But I understand that, you know, there's, especially with owner occupancy requirements, that's an area where it can have certain disproportionate effects on elderly people, lower income. Is the legislature looking at that from an equity perspective, or is it just trying to just drop it all together? Because I think that one of the things that hasn't really been talked about is the equity perspective of owner occupancy.
They're not. The owner occupancy rules have always kind of come from these, I'll generously describe them as progressive folks who are worried about like the BlackRocks coming in, the really big investment firms, and like buying entire neighborhoods and building a ton of ADUs in the backyard. That just like hasn't happened. Even if that were a bad thing, it just hasn't happened. And so like demonstrated to the legislature that hasn't happened is really important. If I'm being extremely cynical and, well, frankly, realistic, I think the reason that Senator Portantino is pushing so hard to allow owner occupancy rules at the state level to sunset is because he understands that they're effective in accelerating home construction, something he generally opposes. So Cole, actually, something I'd love to get in touch with you about is putting out a report on just the benefits of removing owner occupancy stuff. I think to your question about the law, I am also not a lawyer. I just play one on TV. But the law that I would actually pursue is a violation of the Federal Fair Housing Act rather than under the takings clause. The courts have generally been very deferential to local government police powers on taking stuff, zoning, Euclid, just in general, right, for 100 years. But I think they're getting stricter on FHA rules. And I think you can make a really compelling argument that owner occupancy rules actually accelerate things like segregation in ways that are directly contrary to the federal government's FHA, like fair housing rules and the 14th Amendment. That's the legal challenge I mean, you throw everything in the lawsuit, but that's the one that I would really pursue.
And then I think, if you look at the protagonists in this owner occupancy conversation and the districts that they represent, and again, this is people expressing an antipathy to renters. That's basically, that's what's driving the conversation, driving the political motivation. Anthony Portantino doesn't want more renters in Pasadena. I mean, Pasadena is a homeowning community. And so I think that's the basic political motivation.
Well, they make it hard enough to get you approved.
Let me just add
Pasadena already. So
let me just add another thought. The big pushback on this started when we realized that it made it very difficult for certain people to get financing. Now, whether this is this is more of a burden on the lower income families, which I think it is. It's a very different financial market for small units than for multi-unit properties that have, 10 or more units. So that was our big concern. So we were really glad when it got limited. And I think that problem is going to persist if it ever comes back. And it certainly is there now for the junior ADUs, because it just small investors just don't get it, and they're afraid of it. So whatever else there are, it's very important for the financial equity to I think to keep the owner occupancy out. That's a big part of the reason. Thank you.
One last kind of question. Louis, you and I have talked about this previously, but there's a question in there about get essentially state approved or pre-approved plans at the state level. And obviously there's, there's currently, for prefab ADUs, through HCD. But do you see a HCD or any other statewide legislation to have the state be approving ADUs as opposed to the local governments?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some precedent for this.
Let's
not get people too excited, but just,
I'm worried, depending on how they do it.
We have, we have the state HUD, the US HUD approving building code stuff for, mobile homes and manufactured homes. There's precedent for nationalizing, or at least like moving this type of a decision up a level. I really, you see so many ADUs produced in places with pre-approved ADU applications. I mean, you can walk into this into the the San Jose Planning Department and start construction on your ADU that afternoon. That is such an incredible opportunity for homeowners and for the ADU professional community. I think having something like that at the state level would be challenging, but is the next step. We've created this housing accountability unit to watchdog local governments in part to help this industry. Maybe the next step on that is having them actually write the permits for local governments that choose not to.
And just one word of caution on that. I mean, the city of Santa Cruz kind of started this pre-approved planning process a decade or more ago. And they commissioned a competition for architects to draw up plans for ADUs that they would pre-approve, and they drew up some beautiful plans. For the most part, vanity projects that were impossible to build or far too expensive to ever pencil. So the city did approve a number of plans for over-the-counter approval, and I don't think any of them were ever used. So we have to make sure that if we do some kind of upstream approval process, that there are ADU practitioners in the room who can talk sense to the people who are approving the plans of what is economically feasible, what will work, what's a good plan versus a vanity project.
That's a great segue into a future webinar that we have.
Wait a second, Jared. We have just started within Casita Coalition, a small group that's going to try to summarize the experiences we've had so far. What hasn't worked with the pre-approved plans. It's too early to have a lot of statistics and measures about success and not success, but we're hoping to put that together. So at least we know what we know now, and we can share that with people, which will have to be added on to as we go.
I have to sign off, Jared. I am so sorry. I have a 12:15 meeting. I'm running a little bit late too, but I wanted to thank you.
We appreciate you.
Of course. And I'll make my last pitch to those of us who are still on this call. If you are not a Casita Coalition member, do get in contact with us and sign up to become one today. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Louis.
Thank you.
And with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. So definitely appreciate everyone here. And like I said, we have our monthly member calls, which is a great place to bring up issues, bring up questions, bring up ideas that we can take back and see how we can help address them. So for those of you who are not members, I encourage you to join. And for those of you that are, thank you for your support. So. Any last words, Debbie?
Now, thank you for coming, and we'll see you next month.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Well,